A war with Iran still smoldering, deaths in ICE custody, prices Americans haven't seen in 40 years. A midterm map that gets worse for Republicans by the week. So this week, the president and the Secretary of State turned their attention to Cuba. On Monday, the State Department released a 100-page report titled Cuba, the Capital of 21st Century Communism. It reads like a Red Scare throwback of a bygone era, full of contradictions, arguing that Cuba is somehow both a failed state and capable of mass infiltration of the United States. It calls Black Lives Matter a far-left organization and suggests they were alone responsible for the violence during the period of George Floyd protests. It claims Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is part of a national effort to make Cuban communism go, quote, mainstream. And it calls out the 23-year-old daughter of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, calling her a, quote, progressive activist spreading Cuban propaganda. If the language here sounds a bit familiar, it should. 7 decades ago, another ambitious politician stood before the cameras and warned of communists hiding inside in plain sight.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
The Cuban regime's sprawling intelligence and ideological network helped to build the far left in our country and in our hemisphere. And it remains inextricably linked to the far left groups and movements across and beyond the West.
That Cuba that Rubio is talking about is the same Cuba that has been suffering from weeks of rolling blackouts, severe fuel and food shortages, and public health crises. And I know because I have family there living it right now. The idea seems to be this island nation is somehow also simultaneously, allegedly, executing an intelligence operation unseen throughout human history. Now, let's get one thing very clear. I would never deny the Cuban government has mistreated its own citizens, thwarted free expression, and denied them democracy, and kept close ties to governments hostile to the U.S. But a report that tries to stretch from real convicted spies of the past to a movement for racial justice and police accountability in America, to the mayor of Los Angeles, to a congresswoman's 23-year-old daughter, well, isn't really just about Cuba. Maybe it tells us more about who Marco Rubio potentially views as his enemies. Let's bring in Congressman Mark Pocan. He is a member of the Appropriations and Foreign Affairs Committees and just returned from a trip to Cuba. Congressman, it is good to see you. Look, I want your take on the sort of central premise here and the central contradiction, I guess, in this document. There's no arguing that the Cuban government has failed its people in many respects, but it is hard to look at the facts of what's happening on the ground and imagine they're also running some unprecedented, impressive operation in the United States, a government that and a population that dwarfs theirs by many, many times. What is this really about to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fantastical document. It's probably the dumbest thing I've read in 14 years put together by any agency, because it talks about the 60s and 70s, and certainly Cuba was active in the 60s and 70s, but it takes this giant jump to modern day without any connection and acts like, the Scooby-Doo villain when you take the mask off. It's Cuba. And, they're saying Cuba's doing more than Iran or North Korea or Russia or China. And it's just a ridiculous document that's there to set up the politics of South Florida of Marco Rubio. So this isn't that there's a national security threat to the United States in any way. In fact, when we opened up during the Obama administration, we had good relations between the countries and nothing bad happened. And then we went back to this very repressive era of 6.5 decades of a blockade. And the only people we're hurting at the end of the day are the Cuban people. So if we think we're trying to help the Cuban people or have a different government as some want here in Washington, we're doing the exact opposite. It's the definition of insanity.
Do you think that Secretary Rubio is trying to lay the groundwork, create a pretext for something?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is about trying to do an invasion in some way of Cuba. Since what we saw happen in Venezuela, Marco Rubio kept making it connected to Cuba. this report, which is, again, so ridiculous in what they're saying, how this poor nation that has power blackouts pretty consistently now because of our blockade, can't get medicine and medical parts, can't do almost anything because of the U.S., because of our blockade, and we forced others to do this. To say that somehow they're responsible for anything happening, much less Black Lives Matter or ICE protests like it says, is ridiculous. This is about Marco Rubio just trying to do the politics of South Florida. Fortunately, I guess, is maybe the wrong word to use, but the fact that we're in Iran is probably holding them back from doing something. But we are seeing a steady flow of information that looks like they want to do something far more active in Cuba.
You know, Congressman, you mentioned the way in which this report tries to tie events of the 60s and 70s to things happening right now. And I want to read one part of it. It says, that is the campaign Castro launched in 1959, and it is the campaign his heirs are waging still, and in the institutions of the modern American left, in its universities and its nonprofits, its street movements and its media. When you hear him mention universities, the media, the press here, nonprofit organizations, what do you think he's trying to do here? And add to that he names private citizens in this document as well. Is that something that the State Department normally does in its reports?
Well, not as loosely and without facts like they did in this case. I think the other thing to really keep in mind is, don't forget that the president did a directive, NSPM 7, flows off the tongue, doesn't it, that basically is saying Antifa is this entity that's causing all of this. Look, Antifa is nothing. There's not like an address to Antifa. The only Antifa I know is a drag queen with that name, right? It's so ridiculous, yet they're trying to say everything is somehow Antifa or left-related, and it's a way to actually stop free speech in the United States. And that's kind of, this report is doing that again. It's connecting some of those protests against what the United States is doing with ICE or how we're treating people on race relations, and somehow saying that now it's really Cuba, Havana, that's doing all this. It's a ridiculous argument, but I'm used to it now because this has become a ridiculous administration.
Well, there's the ridiculousness that I think some people may see here, but do you think there's real risk to some of the people who are connected to these organizations who are personally named here? We just saw a massive case out of Texas where the federal government went after protesters for an anti-ICE protest there, labeled them all as being part of an Antifa cell, something that they and their lawyers very much deny. Some of the people who are facing years and years and years in prison there are people who didn't even attend the protests at the center of the case there.
And quite honestly, this is what we're complaining about the government of Cuba doing, right? They're the ones who arrest protesters and put people behind the bars, and we've talked to the Cuban government about releasing some of those prisoners. But if the United States takes on that very same behavior, only does it in a way on the left-right political spectrum, that's equally bad. So, you know, I think we are concerned that this is a tool to go after protest like authoritarian regimes do, and we simply can't do it. You know, Tim Schneider's book on tyranny is kind of a book that many people have read during the Trump administration for good reason, that unless we speak out and do this together, you know, a lot of things can slowly happen and we fall into authoritarianism. We can't let Donald Trump do that. So all the more reason for people to be active, to join protests, to join marches, no Kings rallies, whatever they can do. Speaking out is more important than ever to protect everyone that's involved.
Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.